Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure as always.
So today we're talking about the future of the media, specifically in the US, but also just general trends. So my first question would be, in the US, what we see is this huge criticism of mainstream media such as CNN and MSNBC, which are actually not state media because they are, even though they quite obviously parrot government talking points. But what exactly is the relationship between the big US media corporations and the government?
Oh, well, I think one thing that people don't understand is that just because a media might be private, that really doesn't change much. Because ultimately, if we look at both private media and government-controlled media, they're both owned by extremely wealthy and powerful people / organizations. That is to say that the media is ultimately really controlled by the elite of a given country, or now that we live in a more globalized world, let's say the more transnational elite. In order to own media that's really successful, that really has a very powerful reach, or is able to essentially you're essentially able to sort of pay to get the talking points you want put into society. We're talking about the billions of dollars range, okay? So that excludes 99.99 whatever % of us from ever doing so. So ultimately, whether the media is private or governmental, it is really a reflection of the opinion of billionaires, and that's about it. Whether they be the wealth of the government or the wealth in quote unquote private hands.
Yeah, so basically you've already answered this in part, but I still want to ask it. What we see is a lot of so-called independent platforms such as Daily Wire or now Tucker Carlson, and yet, as you already sort of pointed out, they are also dependent on very large donors. So one might ask the question, are they really independent? What is your take on that?
Well, actually, to be honest, if we really want to look at this through some sort of microscope, okay, then no one is independent. Because even if someone makes a YouTube channel about, let's just say, video games, and they start to get advertisers that are products not related to news or information warfare or anything, they're still going to be beholden to those products and advertisements, and they're going to have to essentially, to some extent, do their content in order to make those advertisers happy. And we're talking about something that's very trivial, like watching Mario jump. You see what I mean? So ultimately, there really is no such thing as a truly independent media because human beings need to eat. All of us need food. So, for example, although maybe I could be cute and label myself as being independent, you know, the only reason that I'm able to actively run a Telegram channel is because I have a pretty decent, let's just say, career going within the Russian media. And that means that I'm able to essentially kind of finance myself and not worry too much about money. If tomorrow everything in my life fell apart and I had to focus on food, all this whole Telegram and making YouTube videos about politics would have to wait till I can eat again. You see what I mean? So all of us are beholden to some extent to money. And there's no escaping that fact. And I think people should actually be more honest about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's a point that is seldom talked about, actually. And that brings me to my next question. So what we see in Germany is that we have state media. I mean, they're 100% funded by the government. And actually, Germans have to pay for those channels, whether they watch it, whether they even have a TV or not, which makes them very angry because they now, just like pretty much everywhere else in the West, are just doing the government's bidding. But in the past, actually up into the 90s, that was not that much the case. So they were at least trying their best, I would say, to report relatively neutral. So the question is, more generally speaking, what is the cue to, reporting independently? Is it really with state media? Is that the problem? Or is it rather the intent of those who give the money or the intent of those who do the reporting? Or maybe the problem lies elsewhere altogether. So it seems to me that, in general, it is possible to do, honest reporting, let's say.
Okay, well, you've opened quite a big topic here, and we'll have to answer it in a slightly philosophical way. In my personal opinion, the concept of freedom, and we're going to talk a little bit about freedom here to move on to the next bit. The concept of freedom is essentially when someone is in agreement with society. So, for example, if we put 40 libertarians in a room to have a conversation, although they're not going to all have the same opinions about politics, if they all call themselves libertarians, boy, they're going to agree on a lot. And all of them are going to feel very free to express themselves, right? However, if we take one of those libertarians and stick them at some, I don't know, Communist Party USA meeting, all of a sudden the environment's going to feel very hostile and they're going to feel a lot less free, even though really there's no one with a gun there telling them not to speak or whatnot, right? So I think in some ways what you're talking about in your feelings in Germany, it's not so much that the press has become more or less objective or pays more, let's just say, homage to their financial masters or not. It's that the German masses now disagree with their own media. So they're not in agreement with the media. So it seems to be this alien force that is really restricting their freedom. So that's one of the advantages when society has some level of homogeny and people more or less agree on the rights and wrongs, social mores and norms and this and that. You're able to have a media that you feel presents a more objective picture of reality because you more or less agree with it. In the Western world now, the media is in the complete bonkers zone. It is almost entirely separated from the universe that the masses live in. And that's where this feeling is coming from. Now, if we want to talk also about historical objectivity, right? Almost everyone in the West has some sort of very positive view about the way their media worked in the past. Be it, I think you just mentioned like the early 90s or 80s. Americans usually go back to sort of the Walter Cronkite 60s, 70s, in that, our TV channels showed the real horrors of the Vietnam War to the public, and partially that's the reason it stopped. Okay, cool. But you have to understand that as I'm someone who has worked for a long time in Russia, and I can tell you that ever since the real dawn of the media, and I mean like the newspaper media of mass printing in the industrial era, all information about Russia has been just as corny and ridiculous and absurd now as it was in the original Crimean War back in, what was that, the 1850s? My brain isn't working. 1840s, 1850s, forgive me, I should have checked that before we talked about this. But anyways, middle of the 19th century, yeah, we'll call it that. And that's one of the reasons why the Western elites do not have any concept of what Russia is and live in some sort of bizarre information vacuum, because even information from the Cold War, from the 60s, from the 1930s, 20s, from the 1800s is all just as biased, racist, and wrong then as it is now. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say in programming, and the same thing goes with information of a historical character. So I disagree with you. I don't think that the media has ever really been truly objective. What we can hope to do is then at the very least have the media kind of reflect the opinion of the masses, and they'll like it more, or we at least allow some, let's just say, divergence from mainstream norms, so that way maybe the truth will get out there somewhere. But unfortunately, we're never going to have this utopian moment when the media always serves the public interests, especially when it's being financed by the tiny elite that rule over said public. I think that that's, sadly, like I just said, utopian thinking.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily disagree with that. I would say that I would say that. Don't you think that after World War II, at least, there was a moment where journalists sort of felt responsible to do something more objective, and it really came from the journalists, not necessarily from those who financed them. And I think that there was this ethos that was a little bit different than it is today, which is not saying that they are saying something objective, right? First of all, there's no objective truth. I would absolutely agree with that. And also, Yeah, it's also always culturally bound. So yeah, the picture of Russia in the West was basically always as it is today. That's absolutely true. But don't you think that there was some sort of different ethos, at least in this short period between World War II and maybe the 1980s? Is there? I mean, maybe in the U.S. or
so maybe the situation is better. Again, I only speak two languages. English is a native language, and I speak Russian very well. So I can't really comment on Germany because I can't observe your press the way that you do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the United States, yes, I think as a whole, in the past, before the end of the Cold War, Americans understood the idea of America better. The dynamic of being like, okay, the whole thing of the whole Enlightenment sort of Voltaire thing of I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the right, to the death, your right to say it. Like that logic, I think, was a lot more understood. Unfortunately, the whole rise of the monopolar moment within the 90s has really been very detrimental to American culture. But maybe people understood this better back then. But still, we have to remember, again, there was this thing that occurred in the 1950s called the Red Scare. And how many people stuck their neck out to really say, hey, guys, wasn't the Soviet Union on our side? Didn't we create NATO before they created the Warsaw Pact? Hey, with this whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing, didn't we put nuclear missiles in Turkey? Maybe we're doing the same bad thing they are. All of that ignored, because human beings have a tribal mentality. There is nothing that any of us can do. Well, we can only, it's kind of like a lot of our more primitive human desires. We can push them down or maybe make them more civil, but we can't get rid of them. And that's tribalism. And I think that during the Cold War, maybe people were more objective or understood it, but for their own. Like within America, within the left and right dynamic within America. For them Ruskies and them Chinese and them there, those other people there in them second world countries, who cares about them? They don't count. They're not part of the peerage. And we see that same mentality today, where the media only really considers now not even the West, but only certain people within the West as being part of that peerage, part of the tribe, and the rest of the world, again, the 98, 99% of the rest of the world to just be garbage that doesn't understand their brilliant shining light from a city on a hill.
So if the situation is as dire, so to say, as it is, what would you suggest that people could do to inform themselves better, to get, to a more balanced view of the world?
Oh, well, firstly, it would be to try to find as many sources of information as they can. And also sometimes read some news you hate. Sometimes you got to read stuff that you find just bizarre or disgusting. It's really trying to sort of diversify yourself and also going out of your cultural space. Because, again, the entire West is now really becoming lockstep with each other. Try listening to opinions from Russia and China and India, essentially the BRICS nations, right? I think that would really help to get a comparison. Because at the very least, we all have the right to sort of review things in a broad spectrum and see which arguments are the best. So about this whole war in Ukraine, the Western media says that one day Putin woke up, he had a bad attitude, and he decided to start conquering Ukraine in order to eventually conquer Europe, supposedly up to Portugal or something like that. Or you could review the Russian side that says that due to Western financing, there was a coup in the Maidan, and then the Ukrainian government started killing its own citizens in the Donbass for 10 years. And then Putin had enough after Biden refused to have any sort of negotiation about European security. So you could look at it that way. Look at the two sides and see which argument seems better to you, and you can make your own choice. But if you just sit there in this English language mainstream media, you're only going to get really one and a half, no, not even 1.5, 1.25 sides of an issue, and you're probably not going to get a fuller picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Different sources from very, very different. I mean, it doesn't help if you just, watch CNN and then the alternative is, I don't know, MSNBC. So that doesn't help at all. It has to be from different countries and yeah.
Yeah, you know what's a good model? It's kind of like a debate. I think maybe we need to look at this as sort of some grand debate that's happening around our lives, you know, on any issue. It could be many issues. It could be anything. Abortion, gun rights, again, this war in Ukraine, the situation in Taiwan, Gaza, Israel, whatever. You should really try to listen to different sides. And again, whichever side seems to present the strongest arguments could be the winner of the debate for you as an individual. That's probably the best you're going to get to getting close to some sort of objective, abstract truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's one more point that I would like to touch upon in this regards. We've seen recently, well, not so recently anymore, but that Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he has been a very strong advocate of so-called citizen journalism, and he sees that as some kind of a solution, obviously. Do you agree? What do you think of that?
Well, I would say it's a good thing that we have someone who owns a major social media platform who at least outwardly says that citizen journalism is good. Okay, that's cool. But ultimately, it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier, that citizen journalists have to eat. And thanks to the flash and money of the mainstream media, despite the fact that CNN has dismal ratings, very few people watch it, even on YouTube, even recordings and all that. Still, when an event happens, more or less, a lot of the world, and especially the Western world, follows their talking points. They interpret history first, and we all sort of react to that. And citizen journalists are not going to do that. Billy Bob out there in Kentucky, even if he is an excellent citizen journalist of the highest moral character, is not going to be able to see some sort of new event in the world, blog about it, and then create the talking points that spread nearly globally. Okay, that's not going to happen. And furthermore, with Billy Bob, it's very easy to shut him down. Some threats, maybe freezing a bank account, even the slightest little, let's just say, problem in his life could lead him to having financial problems. And in the United States, if you don't pay your real estate taxes, you lose your home. So citizen journalists are very easy to crush, whereas our wonderful friends with their fancy degrees from Harvard, I think especially Yale, who sit in like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and all that, they are quite well defended, they are quite well fed, and they are quite happy to write whatever the powers that be want them to.
Yeah, that's unfortunately true.
It is the way it is. I'm sorry.
So we just talked a lot about the increased, or maybe not increased, but the existing subjectivity in journalism. So at the same time, what we see is an increased use of AI. Also in the media and in journalists, we now have AI presenters. The content can be generated, translated, modified, you name it. And generally, apparently, the trust in AI-generated content is growing. So that's a little bit of a provocative question, probably. Is AI-generated content really more objective?
Well, no, because someone controls the AI. I mean, if we even look back to a lot of, we've seen a lot of articles where, wasn't it one of the ones I believe made by Microsoft, their AI started to produce a lot of very actual Hitlerian opinions in its, content, basically mimicking his views on things, and they shut that down. So essentially, again, it's the same thing. You have someone who can really control the AI and lead it. One thing is that this whole AI thing is again, it's another like bubble. It's kind of like 3D printing or the whole startup boom or the Bitcoin or I should say cryptocurrency NFT boom. It's really overinflated its capabilities. So we really shouldn't get too excited about its future because there's only so much that it can actually do. But do people believe in AI or not? Well, the thing is that, one of the flaws of democracy is that everyone is essentially considered equal. And if we look across the masses, we all know people who aren't the brightest on the block. and their opinion still counts when it comes to voting and all that other stuff. And it's just a question of, okay, can AI fool people, or could people fool people? Yes and yes. Only AI can fool people maybe in a faster way because it can generate much more garbage content. It can generate deep fake videos much more quickly. In fact, even on my own channel over the last year, I have been informed by my viewers that I got caught twice posting things on Telegram where it actually was a deep fake, where they kind of slipped in just a couple words in this video, a video of like 360p video. The lips are flapping, and you can slip in a lot of things that someone didn't actually say. So it does definitely increase the ability to both quickly produce garbage content or lies, and also create very believable fake content. But again, I try to consider myself not the dumbest guy on the planet, but I can be fooled too. So it does do something, but ultimately human beings are gullible, and the overwhelming masses of people toil. They work and they toil, and they're concerned with more so with their bread and circus rather than with deeply philosophical and intellectual concepts. If you think that at some point in human history, the average person in any country was sitting around deeply thinking about the meaning of their nation, the meaning of the philosophy of their state, this is not the case. Maybe at best on Sundays, people went to church and thought about something higher for a few hours, at the very best. You know, the average person sort of exists to exist, and it's only really the work of maybe at most 5% of the population that are really the intellectuals who drive this information warfare and all of our let's just say conflicts of a again, intellectual nature.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the point, that those very same intellectuals somehow never get that the vast part of the population is not thinking in that way, is not that
well, yeah, because they're not connected to them.
Yeah,
one thing
exactly.
is, like people in Russia say now, anyways, you know, Marx never worked a day in his life. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but it seems to be that way, that generally a lot of the people who are the most intellectually motivated and have these ideas about how to bring this utopian future to the average person have zero connection to the average person. They're sitting in fancy salons. And again, if you look at like the intellectuals of the Enlightenment too, you know, or even the founding fathers of the United States, although they definitely, I think the Bill of Rights was the right thing to do. If you think about who was really discussing the future of America, it was the absolute most wealthy and powerful people in the country who are very disconnected from, again, Jimmy Joe out there fishing in the Bay of Boston, you know, breaking his back and hands every day to haul in crab and cod and all those other critters of the sea. You know what I'm saying? So ultimately, yeah, the people who really are the idea makers are not connected to the masses, and idea spreaders as well, for the most part. Again, you know, the mainstream media is filled with these wonderful graduates from Yale. That is not the average American, and that person is very far removed from the mentality of the average American.
Exactly, exactly. So my final question, another provocative question. In light of everything we have discussed up to now, is classic journalism dead, or maybe has it never existed?
I'm on the second part. We kind of talked about this earlier, but I think that this whole classic journalism is a little bit of sort of like looking fondly at the past. Like, weren't things just wonderful in the past? You know, I even remember a good friend of mine said, you know, medieval times were great. That's when men were men. And if you had a conflict with someone, you could decide it with a sword. On the one hand, yeah, as a man, being able to sort of, if someone doesn't keep their word, being able to, let's just say, put them to the sword, there's a certain appeal to that. But we have to remember the Black Plague, you know, people dying for reasons that no one really understood. You know, infant mortality was horrible, so on and so forth. So we can't really pick and choose. I think that we can't again, go back to overinflating the glories of the past, and we have to try to find solutions now. And again, like I pointed out, maybe in the past in the West, within society, maybe journalists were a bit more connected to the land. They were more connected to the people. Like, I'm from Cleveland, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer for many years was considered a very good and very fair source of information for the masses, right? And the reporters who worked there were from Ohio itself. Interesting how that works, right? But nowadays, you know, what does one little newspaper in one medium-sized American city do? It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. And so the dynamic has changed, and we can't expect to go back to a time where the average German is going to read only, you know, information from the Dortmund Daily News. I don't know what newspaper they have in Dortmund.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's going to be only run by people who are born there generation upon generation, who maybe don't even have a journalism degree, but gosh darn it, their heart's in the right place. That's kind of a fantasy world. We're never going to return to anything close to that.
Yes, amen to that. So thank you very much, Tim, for coming on this show, and have a great day.
You too.
Das war unser Interview der Woche mit dem freien Journalisten Tim Kirby. Vielen Dank, dass Sie zugeschaut haben. Wenn Sie Anregungen haben, Kommentare, Meinungen dazu, Kontroverses hören wir immer gerne, schreiben Sie es unter das Video und denken Sie dran, Däumchen hoch, abonnieren und das kleine Glöckchen läuten. Beehren Sie uns bald wieder.